And there was day and there was night.
This is an interview with Reverend Frank Dukes for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're at Miles College, May 11th, 1995. Thank you, Reverend Dukes, for coming out and taking time out of your busy schedule to sit with us today. It's obvious what we're attempting to do is we want to put ourselves in a position so that there's a possibility of writing the real history of Birmingham and the movement. And we know you played a prominent role in that. So thank you for coming out to help us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I just want to start by asking some background questions. Where were your parents from?
My mother was from Selma, Alabama, and my father from Fairfield, Alabama.
And you were born where?
In Fairfield.
In Fairfield. Fairfield, a suburb of Birmingham, or is Birmingham a suburb of Fairfield?
Larry Lincoln would say it's a suburb of Fairfield.
How many brothers and sisters did you have, and what were your rank order?
Well, there were 8 of us.
Uh-huh.
Now there are 7.
Okay.
And I'm the third from the beginning of the siblings.
All right. So you're the third oldest.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me just a bit about your parents and their education.
Well, my father had an 11th grade education. And my mother had about a 8th or 9th grade education because she went to night school to get that far.
Right.
And she was a domestic worker for many years. And after that, she became an Avon salesperson.
I see. What kind of work does your father do?
Steel worker.
Okay, well, in Fairfield.
Yeah.
Tell me then, Fairfield is known really around the country for any number of things, particularly steel, and for being the birthplace of Willie Mays.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little, can you just describe the community of Fairfield as you grew up?
Well, Fairfield was quite a stable community during those days, and I'm speaking comparatively now. Most of the persons worked in one of the steel mills or the brickyard or someplace. And Fairfield Industrial High School, in my opinion, was the greatest high school in the world. Academics were stressed first priority, second priority, third priority, as well as discipline. And there are Fairfield graduates holding down very significant professional positions in all the major cities in this country.
There was a gentleman there at Fairfield that sort of set the tone, Dr. Oliver.
Professor E.J. Oliver,
Yes.
in my opinion, the greatest principal that ever lived, a strict disciplinarian who placed all emphasis on discipline and education. And when we used to go down to Montgomery to compete against high schools from all over Alabama, those were during the days of segregation. There were no whites to compete against. Wouldn't have mattered. We would have done just as well or better, I'm sure. But we used to win the majority of the first place ribbons in all the academic subjects: math, science, biology, chemistry, you name it. We won it.
So you looked then at Fairfield as setting a firm foundation for you in the community, the high school
Very much
was
so.
the foundation.
For example, if you attended Fairfield Industrial High, if you were absent, you had to go back home the next day and bring your mother or your father or your aunt or uncle or somebody that Professor Oliver knew. Or same thing applied if you were tardy. So it was well run, well organized.
What do you remember about recreation in Fairfield?
Well, that was just, aside from the high school football and basketball teams, those were the two sports we had in those days. And of course the band. And then there was sandlot baseball. Most of the teams sponsored teams. Most of the companies, like USX, at that time it was US Steel. They would sponsor teams. SIPCO would have a team, Stockton would have a team. They would compete against each other.
What was your community's relationship to the police department?
Horrible. There was no relationship. Horrible. The police had one job, that was to arrest black folk.
So are you suggesting that the police was not in the community to protect and serve?
Well, I'm not suggesting, I'm stating it emphatically. No, they were not.
So after you finished high school, what did you do?
I left, and after I held a couple of small, nondescript jobs, then I left and went in the Army in 49.
And how long were you in the Army at that?
Well, in 49, I went in and stayed a year. Got discharged in September 50. Went back in September, got discharged in July, rather, 50. Went right back in September 50 when the Korean War started. And I got out in October 51. And I went back in the service in 54 and got out and was discharged in 57.
What did you do between 51 and 54?
I worked at the Dodge automobile plant, which was a division of Chrysler.
And where was that?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit. How did you compare Detroit with Birmingham?
Oh, it beat Birmingham in 1,000 different ways in terms of discrimination and segregation, all that kind of stuff. It was not a panacea, however, but it was a far cry from what we had to undergo here in the South.
So you then went back into the military from Detroit.
Yeah.
And you were in the military then until
57.
57.
Yeah.
And after you discharged in 57, what did you do?
I went back to Detroit and went back to work at the Dodge automobile plant, and got laid off in 58, I believe it was. And I came back to Birmingham.
And when you came back to Birmingham, did you then live in Birmingham or in Fairfield?
I lived in Fairfield.
Were you married at the time?
No.
Still a young man, footloose and fancy free.
That's right.
In 1958, Birmingham was really sort of embarking on at least preparing for what would take place in the next few years. In 56, of course, the NAACP is outlawed from organizing in the state of Alabama. And the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights is developed. 1958, when you returned, did you go to work at US Steel?
No. When I came back in 1958, I was hustling in the pool room and shooting craps.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. And I was waiting to go back to Detroit to work at Dodge automobile plant when they sent me a telegram to come back. In the meantime, I started the miles in 59.
Okay.
And when they called me to come back to work at Dodge Main, I decided to stay in college, and I didn't go back.
So you remained in college at Miles between 58 and...
Yeah, well, I started in 59, the summer of 59.
Okay. You were a student leader at the time.
Yeah, I was student government president.
Okay. How did that evolve? How did you get involved in student government?
Well, you know, when time to run for the offices, a lot of the students asked me to run. So I ran and I won.
So you were perceived as a leader when you...
Yeah, well, you see, I was much older than the majority of the students. You see, I was about 29 or 30 when I went to college. And most of these kids were like 18, 19, 20.
Yeah. Well, and you happened then to have been at Miles at a really volatile time. Because in 1960, of course, you had the beginning of the sit-in movement, although it began much earlier. But college students started getting involved. In 61, you have the freedom rides that come. And Miles then is organizing. Tell me a little about that period between 60 and prior to the demonstrations in 63.
Well, I believe it was in 59, the fall of 59. Some of the students went down in the park, Kelly Ingram Park, to protest, and they were arrested. And at that time, Dr. Bell was president of Miles College, and his philosophy was 360 degrees away from ours in terms of what we were about.
We meaning the students?
Students, yeah. And so that little protest didn't get off the ground, really. The infamous Bull Connor was in office then, as you may well know. And we didn't really get involved again until I would think probably around late 61 when we started organizing.
Right. Were you at all involved, familiar with what was taking place with the development of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights?
No, I became a member before the demonstrations and the selective bond campaign and all that stuff. But in the very beginning, when Reverend Shuttlesworth organized it, I don't think I had come back to Birmingham at that time.
Yeah, they organized in 56.
Yeah, well,
you were away
yeah, I was
at
away.
that time. In 61, when the organizing of students started to take place, what precipitated that?
Well, some of the students, like in North Carolina, were protesting and demonstrating.
Right.
And a group of us felt that we should do the same thing because we were hamstrung by segregation, discrimination, and all those other ills and wrongs. So we just got a committee together. U.W. Clement, who is now federal judge U.W. Clement, Shelley Millender. You may know Shelley.
I do know Shelley.
A fellow by the name of Rotha Meredith. And Dr. Jonathan McPherson, who at that time was a chemistry professor here, who now is the owner of Scott McPherson Funeral Home. He was our advisor and worked with us in the very beginning.
And this is based upon what you see happening in North Carolina with the full students who started the city.
Yeah. We felt that we could not sit idly by and not protest here because the conditions in Alabama were worse than those in North Carolina. And I personally never accepted the role of being subservient to white folk, even as a boy, young boy.
What do you remember? Why do you say that as a young boy you didn't accept it?
Because occasionally I would get in fights with white boys about calling me nigger. And I'd fight at the drop of a hat. And then, you walking on the sidewalk sometime and you approach a white person, they'd want you to move off and let them by. And I refused to do it. And stuff like that.
What did your parents say about that kind of behavior at the time?
Well, my mother, in particular, my grandmother, always told us not to pick a fight, but don't run from a fight. If anybody accosted us, to stand our ground. Be the person black, white, green, or brown.
So when you arrived then at Miles College, with that kind of background and with what it started to develop and students starting to get involved in the struggle, you basically were already primed for that kind of activity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Selective buying campaign. What actually precipitated the selective buying campaign?
Well, Dr. Pitts got worried that a group of students were getting ready for some direct action. So he sent for us, and he wanted to know what we were going to do, what we planned to do, because he was not going to fight us. Rather, he was going to advise us, because he had had a lot of experience in that kind of thing down through the years. And he wanted us to protest like we wanted to protest, but he wanted us to do it in an organized fashion and to do it in such a way that hopefully we wouldn't get killed off the bat. So we started to meet. And then Dr. Pitts, if you have heard anything about him at all, he was one of the world's greatest diplomats and a brilliant man. And he had a good relationship with the white leaders in metropolitan Birmingham, as well as the black leaders. And he talked with a bunch of the white power structure persons, and we started having meetings with these white businessmen in an effort to get stores desegregated, high black salesmen, black firemen, black policemen, everything we have now. We started meeting with these gentlemen in an effort to try to get them to use their power to bring this about.
Does this precede now the 63 demonstrations
right.
Because those were some of the demands that were being generated.
Right. Well, had it not been for the success of the selective buying campaign, actually it was a boycott. But in those days, a boycott was illegal. So we had to call it selective buying. Had it not been for the success of the selective buying campaign, there wouldn't have been the demonstration of 63. Because the selective buying campaign got the black populace of Birmingham ready for direct action.
Tell me, why did you think that there was such a difference between President Bell and President Pitts?
Well, Dr. Pitts was a visionary. Also, he had never accepted the role that had been forced upon black people by the white power structure across this country. And Dr. Bell, philosophically, I would think, or maybe from more of a practical standpoint, if not philosophically, had acclimated himself to blend in and follow the rule of law as set forth by the white folk.
Was Bell originally from Birmingham? Did you know?
It's my understanding. I think he came from Georgia.
Okay. And Dr.
I know
Pitts
he lived in Georgia most of the time when he was president here.
And Dr. Pitts was not originally from
No, he was from Georgia.
Right. Explain to me how the organization of the selective buying campaign took place.
Well, we started the meeting, first of all, with some of the white power structure. The late Sidney Smyer, James A. Head, I think he's still alive. Emil Hess of Parisians, the president of Lawman's, president of a fellow named Roper Dial, who was president of Sears Roebuck. That must have been some 7, 8.
Okay, you say we. Who are you?
Well, that would have been U.W. Clement, Shelley Millender, Rotha Meredith, Dr. McPherson, and myself.
All millennials.
Yeah.
And this is the initial contact with the, in quote, power structure.
Right, right.
And how did those meetings, how did they go?
Well, in the very beginning, they got off to a shaky start because the white power structure persons were trying to tell us to wait and things would work themselves out, and we couldn't buy that. And they were telling us that they didn't have any power to change anything in Birmingham because they lived in Mountain Brook, and Bull Connor was a beast, and that they were afraid of him, all that kind of stuff.
So they were portraying that difference then between the business community and the government.
Right,
of
right,
Birmingham.
right.
And they wanted you to slow your pace.
Exactly.
And allow them to do certain things.
Well, they had planned to do anything. They were really stalling, like the stall had been on for hundreds of years, you know. But while we were having these meetings, I guess after we had had about 5 meetings, we saw that they weren't going to do anything but stall. And we were getting ready to start our selective buying campaign. And and we told them this, but they didn't believe that it would work, you see. So we started the selective buying campaign.
As a result of their inactivity.
Yeah, well, what happened was, at that time, we had done our research, and we knew that department stores operated on a 15% margin of profit. And we knew all we had to do was cut into the margin of profit. And that would make those owners of those department stores or those managers or presidents, what have you, have another thought about trying to give us some redress of our grievances. And when we started selective buying campaign, after about 5 or 6 weeks, Birmingham was lily white downtown. You didn't see any black people shopping at all. And when we first started, some of those businessmen approached Bull Connor to try to get him to change the laws here. And Bull Connor said, we aren't going to change anything because those niggas are not going to stay out of downtown shopping. They'll be back. And when they didn't go back, Miles College in the meantime had started a March of Dimes drive to get books for the library. And we had to get a permit to march for this fundraising drive. And Bull Connor denied us the permit. And from there, we got national and international publicity. And that helped to start the ball to really rolling. And during that period of time, some of the stores, they desegregated the water in the restrooms, but they didn't hire any black salespersons or anything like that.
What was the mechanism that the students used to get black people in the communities that were not part of Miles College involved in the selective buying campaign?
Well, we ran hundreds of thousands of leaflets listing what we were protesting about. We wanted black firemen, black policemen, black folk at Social Security, black folk at Internal Revenue, all the jobs black folk now hold, what we were asking for, and restaurants, segregation restaurants, because at that time, the only jobs black folk could get in Birmingham, you either had to be a preacher in a black church, teacher in a black school, or an insurance salesman. There were 2 public health workers who doubled as social workers. A lady named Mildred Fell and another gentleman whose name I can't recall. But aside from those 2 individuals, nobody else worked out in the white community, had their office headquarters in the white community, because they worked in the black community. They didn't deal with white folk who needed their services.
Although there were many black domestics that worked in white homes.
All right. Most, we could always tell Thursday in downtown Birmingham, because there was the Maid's Day Off in Mountain Brook. And all those ladies would come downtown to shop and go to the restaurants and the bars and different places.
Mm-hmm. Well, were there any difficulties with any of the people that you had to persuade anyone not to use the stores at the time of the?
Well, we would have meetings out in the community sometime with groups and explain our situation. And we just kept these leaflets flowing. See, we would get up early every Sunday morning, maybe like, say, 4 o'clock. And we'd have the back seat and trunk of cars loaded with leaflets. And we'd go around, and at that time, churches didn't lock the doors. So we could go in the churches, and we would put leaflets on all the benches. So when the people got to church, they could read them. And then we would put them in all of the public places. And then we would go into the white banks and leave them on the table where you wrote out checks and stuff. So we got the word around.
Was the Alabama Christian movement involved with you all at that point?
No.
When did they get involved with?
Well, before we even started our meetings, we met with the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights and Reverend Shuttlesworth and told him what we were about, because we needed his blessing in order to start our program. So that's how we got involved with them. But the actual mechanics of the Selective Buying Campaign was conducted and operated by Miles College students.
Miles College.
And some of the black ladies from the Birmingham community, folk like Dina Drew and Ruth Barfield Pendleton and Dr. Montgomery's wife. I can't think of her first name now.
Mm-hmm. But they would, what was their role?
They helped us. They furnished transportation. And Dina Drew, as you know, looked like a white woman. And she could go places and get stuff for us, go into the White Citizen Council's meeting and stuff and get information and bring it back.
So she actually went to White Citizen Council meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were very supportive of the efforts here.
Yeah, they worked real hard. As a matter of fact, we had a big meeting once at Dina Drew's house of all the a significant number of black professional women who at that time was mostly school teachers. And because most of them had charge accounts at Burger Phillips, Odom Biles and White, Blacks, all of the elite department stores. And we had a meeting with those women and told them to stop going in the stores shopping, stop buying any kind of clothing from them, because we wanted the Selective Buying Campaign to be a success. And we would say things like, if you go in Loveman's or Pazette's and you spend $500, you can't go up on the mezzanine and spend a quarter for a glass of tea. and they could see the difference.
Your demands that you had made that resulted in the development of the selective buying campaign, how successful were you in realizing those things that you wanted?
Well, as I said earlier, what we really got out of the selective buying campaign was we unified the Black community psychologically and philosophically. And in terms of like the segregation of stores and all this kind of stuff, all that we got was the segregation of the water and the restrooms.
So you laid foundation then for SCLC and Alabama Christian
Right.
Movement.
Well, after in the middle of the selective buying campaign, Dr. King sent Wyatt T. Walker, Andrew Young, and Bernard Lee out here to Miles College to confer with me. And what he wanted me to do, as soon as I felt that Birmingham was ready for nonviolent demonstrations, to let him know. And on the strength of the success of our selective buying campaign, we notified Dr. King that Birmingham was ready, Black Birmingham was ready. And that's when he came to Birmingham and met with the Black leaders and so forth.
You mentioned that you had the blessings of Reverend Shuttlesworth and the Alabama Christian Movement. Were you getting any physical assistance from the movement during those days?
Well, as I recall, you're talking about 30-some years ago, we just went at it on our own. And we would go to the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights meetings every Monday night to let the people know what was going on and what we were doing, those who may not have known. And we got their blessing. But the majority of all those leaflets are being handed out and all that kind of stuff was done by Miles College students and some of those ladies that I mentioned.
So you attended the movement meetings, Alabama Christian Movement meetings on Monday night.
Yeah.
Can you describe what those meetings were like?
Well, they were really church meetings, really. And there would be always a main speaker, somebody would preach, and then there would be some other people who would talk about the segregation and discrimination, all this stuff that we were encountering. And this was the gist of it, from meeting to meeting.
Were you aware that Birmingham policemen were present?
Yeah, they sat down on the front bench with tape recorders and recorded everything that went on. And we said what we wanted to say, and they recorded a lot. Oftentimes, the police who would be recording what was being said, when collection time came around, they would put money in the collection plate.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you go to jail?
Yeah, twice.
What were the circumstances of your
Well,
arrest?
in '63, Easter Sunday, N.H. Smith, A.D. King, John Porter, and me, we led the march in '63 from Thurgood, CME Church. At that time, it was on 11th Avenue, 7th Avenue and 11th Street. And we led that particular march, and we got arrested. After we had gotten about a couple of blocks, Chief Jamie Moore and his stormtroopers came down on us, and we all got arrested.
How long did you remain in jail?
On that account, I was in for 5 days. And then the next time I went to jail, when we had a trial, and Bull Connor had issued order to the judge to fine all the niggas $100 in 6 months, 180 days. And Judge Brown was adjudicating the trials. And in the middle of this particular trial, he died, had a heart attack and died.
On the bench?
On the bench. And we had prayer for the fallen brother. And as soon as they hauled Judge Brown out, Bull Connor sent for Judge Conway. And as soon as Judge Conway sat in the seat that Judge Brown had died in, Bull Connor said, continue giving all the niggas $100 fine and 180 days. And we went off to jail.
So he was really in control.
He ran Birmingham. There were two other commissioners, but he ran Birmingham. They were more or less figureheads.
What were the circumstances of your arrest that time, the second time?
Well, the second time was we went to jail because we weren't going to pay the fine.
Oh, I see. Were there other instances of your being arrested?
Going to jail?
Yes.
That was the only time I got arrested.
Okay. Did others in your family participate?
My younger brothers and sisters were in the marches, but none of them ever got arrested.
What was the reaction of your family to your involvement?
Well, my family was 100% behind me because, as I told you earlier, we didn't pick fights, but we didn't run from fights. We get in the middle of it. 100% support.
You were still a single man at the time during the 63 demonstrations?
Yeah, I was a bachelor, as a matter of fact, until I became 37.
What church were you a member of at the time?
At that time, it was called First Baptist Annisburg, but it's now called Antioch, and it's down on 54th Street here in Upper Fairfield.
What was the level of involvement of the church and your pastor at that time?
Well, I was a member of the church, but I was zooming around, knowing everything going on. I wasn't really active in the church.
How would you... At
that time.
Right. I know later on you would become a minister. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But how would you say the community of Birmingham Metropolitan benefited from the movement that was organized by yourself and others that you've discussed?
Oh, as I said earlier, the two main things, as I see it, was that we were able to get the folk philosophically ready and psychologically ready, from the standpoint of psychologically ready, not to be afraid to protest, and that the only way we were going to get some changes was through direct action.
The movement, usually when we start talking about the movement here in Birmingham, we usually end up in 1963. And we know that the movement continued. There were things that were happening. What were you doing after the demonstrations of 63?
Well, I finished Miles in May 62. And Dr. Pitts hired me as director of public relations and alumni affairs in June of that same year. So even during the time when we were in this elected bond campaign and demonstration, I was working here at Miles College. So I continued to work here to help Dr. Pitts build this institution.
Was SNCC ever involved with organization here at Miles?
No,
in Birmingham?
SNCC, CORE, all of those groups would come through here from time to time and talk with us, and they wanted to get involved in it. But we believed that we would be more effective if the students who were involved in the fight were from Birmingham.
So did you discourage people from outside from participating?
We didn't really discourage them, but what we told them that this was a homegrown movement. And if they wanted to give us their support, fine. But in terms of the mechanics, we would operate that.
How many students were involved at Miles at the time? You know, just in terms of, I know in terms of your negotiation, you had just a few people involved.
Right.
But at the height of the movement, for instance, at high schools and at junior high schools, kids left the schools and became involved in demonstrations. How did that transpire here at Miles?
Well, after we got the Selective Mind campaign going, on one weekend, we got a petition, and we got all the Miles College students we could find to sign it. So I would imagine some 600 or 700 signed it. And then we got citizens from the community to sign it. And we took that petition down to the courthouse and City Hall and presented it to Bull Connor and Jabo Wagner and Art Haynes, who were the other two commissioners. And the group who took the petition down there was U.W. Clement, Frank Dukes, Jonathan McPherson, and Shelley Millender. And we had alerted the press that we were going to be there. So the press was there when we got there. So when they got through with the city's business, Bull Connor wanted to know if anyone else had anything they wanted to say. So Clement was our first spokesman. And Clement got up to talk about, we wanted black policemen and firemen and internal revenue, just everything that we got now. And Bull Connor cursed Clement out, called him a bunch of niggas, and told him that before there would be black policemen in Birmingham, niggas would be deacons in the First Baptist Church. That was the big white First Baptist Church up on 21st Street, I think 4th Avenue at that time. And McPherson got up and made his speech. Then I got up and made my speech. And some of the persons in Birmingham who were in cahoots with the police department.
These are black persons?
Yeah, snitches. Okay. Had told Bull Connor that I was not from Birmingham, that I was from Detroit, down here stirring up trouble. So Bull Connor told me, said, well, if you don't like the way I run Birmingham, why don't you leave and go back to Detroit? I said, this is my hometown, just like it is yours, and I'm going to stay here until we get it right. And he didn't say another word.
So he reacted to Clemens, but he didn't react to either of the others?
He reacted to McPherson, too. I just don't remember the terminology that he used. But he didn't say anything to me other than what I said.
What did you do? Do you remember what happened after that?
Well, we had a press conference down at Thurgood CME Church, and they wrote it up and it was on TV and all that. That was about the size of that.
But then that is part of that organization.
All part and parcel, yeah.
Yeah, to get other people involved.
Right. And it gave a lot of people, black folk, courage, because people were, both black and white, were literally afraid of Bull Connor, because when the news got out that we were going down there to challenge Bull Connor, people were calling our homes and begging us not to go, because they said
people like who? Friends of yours?
Black folk and white folk who knew our families would call and say, don't go, because you're going to get killed down there. But we were committed.
So there was real concern about the safety of those who had nerve enough to challenge.
Because it was a dangerous thing to do.
Well, were you, your family, ever physically threatened with violence as a result of your activity?
Not to my knowledge that I can recall, no.
Then what about faculty other than Dr. McPherson?
Other than Dr. McPherson, Abraham Woods. I can think of no other faculty member who actively participated and who went to jail and all that kind of stuff, other than Abraham Woods.
What about activity on campus? Were they supportive in terms of allowing students to do certain things? Well,
as far as I knew, none of the faculty members fought the students. Matter of fact, the faculty cooperated because President Pitts was helping us spearhead this thing. So they worked with us from that standpoint.
What would be your most vivid memory during this struggle, when you were making this effort to organize people, develop the selective buying campaign, what stands out in your mind more than anything else?
I would guess when we first started meeting with those white power structure gentlemen, first meetings they addressed us all as niggers. And about the third meeting we became boys. And about the fourth, fifth meeting, then we were on first name basis. And you'd have to have been under bondage to understand why that would stand out.
You now had been away from Birmingham. You'd been in the military. You lived in Detroit. Others, I guess, Dr. McPherson had probably been away. I'm not sure about Millinger and Clemens. They were younger. What do you think provided the courage for those of you who had been away, but more so those who had probably not been away from Birmingham?
Well, I didn't get my courage because I had been away.
Okay.
As I told you, when I was a little boy, I was always getting in fights. I always had it.
So you're being a little bit older, and I had the same experience. I was older when I went into college. So, younger people would sort of flock around you. You were sort of the catalyst for others around you because of really your background.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that engendered the Miles College students to get involved was, last name was Lowe. I was trying to think of his first name, but a gentleman who was a producer with ABC. He came down to Birmingham with a camera crew, and I'm sure you've read about it. They did a documentary on the race question here in Birmingham, and they showed it all over the country, and it was called Who Speaks for Birmingham? And many of us spoke, and of those of us who spoke, including citizens from the Birmingham community, they highlighted what I said and what Shelley Miller said and a few others. And the students at Miles College, to see us on the screen define the white power structure and the Klan and all these people, they got courage.
So that courage was infectious.
Yeah.
And really people became proud of being able to do what you all were doing.
Right.
And so therefore they started to take part.
Right. And then everybody was hungry for some freedom because we had none. You know.
Are there any issues that we have not touched on that you would like to just mention before we end our session today?
Nothing other than if it were possible for Bull Connor to be alive, I'd like to see him around here to see Federal Judge U.W. Clement on that 7th floor up there looking out over Birmingham, who he said better leave out of Birmingham. If he ever came back down there, he was going to have his head beat to a mush. And to see the mayor who's black, police chief who's black, with 4 or 5 deputy police chiefs who are black, the head fire person is black, the head of the sanitation department is black. This stuff that we had in our statement that we wanted to happen has happened.
The changes are your greatest revenge.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And it does my heart a lot of good when I go into department stores, internal revenue, or Social Security, see black folk who are supervisors and all that kind of stuff, managers, before the demonstrations and selective buying campaign. When you saw a black person in a building downtown, he had a mop and a broom, or she had a mop and a broom.
So all of that changes as a result of people developing courage
Right.
to stand on their own 2 feet.
With prayer.
With prayer.
With prayer.
It's been a pleasure, Reverend Dukes, to have you with us today, and I certainly appreciate it. We would like to probably at some later date, after we've gone through all of this, we may want to sit down with you again. But I want to thank you for coming today, and we certainly do appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well,